How doth she expect to be taken seriously whilst donning pantaloons of such ridiculous amplitude? It maketh no sense. The Gmp's really came out to play in Geneva. They're so large, they're literally like clown pants here. Plus, she made it all about her. Once again, Meghan Markle had a very embarrassing time in Geneva. Nothing really went right with that trip. There was 0 crowds come out to see her. There was Gmp's, giant man pants, that were comically large, and she made the speech about herself. The media even picked up on the hypocrisy of her just the other day posting a picture, a very strange picture, by the way, to Instagram of her child sitting at her feet right before decrying social media impacts on youth. So almost all the media reporting on it ran with that controversial angle of what even is happening here with this hypocrisy. I wonder if this disaster on all fronts will finally get her attention. Probably not. She immediately followed up with a major deflection, posting tons of wedding photos, which we're getting to in another video. Please do subscribe so you do not miss it. I have a slightly different theory. I'm not sure this was 100% motivated by deflecting from the Geneva disaster. I have an alternative theory I will be presenting in that video. But if there were any event recently in Meghan's calendar that should have been a wake-up call for her, it should have been this one. Remember Archewell back when it was a foundation before their downgrade? They used the Parents Network launch that they did and very quickly abandoned to harvest content for the Lost Screen Display Memorial. And it was supposed to be a really big deal. Parents Network, the Lost Screen Memorial, the whole thing was supposed to sort of save Archewell Foundation. It didn't work out. But the theory is that the Lost Screen Display was an advocacy tool that other nonprofits or organizations could host and have it displayed as an advocacy and awareness tool. But since its debut one night in New York City, I am increasingly frustrated that all the articles say, oh, it was an installation in New York City in the month of April. I think it was 2025. It was a one night in April. One night. So, I mean, that is important distinction there because the way the press often reports on this, it makes it seem like it was a whole month. It was one night, you guys. And I know that sounds shocking, but I triple checked. It was up for one evening in New York City. But besides that, it's only had one other outing besides Geneva. It was up for a few days in a park in Los Angeles earlier this year, and then it was in Geneva for a week. And the Parents Network, having served its purpose, shut down and was absorbed by Parents Together. So this Lost Screen Memorial, as poignant as it is, isn't exactly the champion project that I think they envisioned for Archewell. But regardless, Meghan gave a 10-minute speech that really didn't go down well. Because she had just posted this strange photograph of her child sitting at her feet in her closet, this speech was grossly undermined by this tone and undercurrent of hypocrisy. And she posts a lot of personal pictures, including those of her children, online regularly. So this isn't just like a one-off. This is kind of a pattern that really doesn't align with the values that she's pushing when she makes these speeches or these statements about child online safety. The attempt to frame child online safety as a major public health issue drew fierce online backlash. The irony seems only lost on her and Prince Harry. To make matters worse, the sparse crowd attendance and harsh press critiques dominated the news cycle, including the photo of Meghan with this controversial politician. She used an analogy during her speech of seatbelts, that the need for seatbelts pressured governments into implementing policy to protect children, and thus the same thing should be happening with protecting children online. The government should impose some sort of a seatbelt sort of situation. But this analogy didn't really land, given that social media is not a required part of daily life the way traveling in a vehicle is. And her most controversial statement from her speech was, quote, "Because if an adult is barely able to survive the bullying and predation of the online world and the dangers that these platforms can bring, how is a child?" This was seen as a way to recenter the moment to herself and her own personal grievances. This felt not only selfish, but it undermined her presence there, adding fuel to the popular opinion that she makes everything about herself, and that she cannot survive an encounter with a microphone without talking about herself. The worst part for Meghan was probably the lack of interest in Geneva. A complete and utter lack of crowds. People were just going about their day in the background in the video of the speech. It was, for her, I would imagine, quite disappointing for this big moment, a quite long speech. I know 10 minutes doesn't feel like very long, but I have delivered memorized 10-minute speeches, and it feels really long when you're the one giving the speech, but no one came to see it. Even though it was at the UN and WHO is the co-host, you would think that it delivered a certain air of diplomacy or gave it a more official feel. But no one showed up. And for Meghan, who loves pictures almost as much as she loves microphones, or perhaps she loves pictures more than microphones, how wounding that must have been, especially with the comparisons to Catherine, Princess of Wales, who had the streets absolutely packed. People were hanging out of windows just to catch a glimpse of her and wave at her for 2 days straight in Italy recently. Outlets that tracked the global royal sentiment and news focused heavily on the lack of public interest in Geneva. This was a big deal that nobody came out to see Meghan deliver this speech or launch this display. Articles across the media echoed this critique that her global summits are starting to feel more like a performance than a commitment to real change. The fact that there was empty streets makes it impossible to ignore, and the contrast between her very polished image with the dark eyeshadow and trying to look and sound super serious, with a lack of local crowd warmth, shows her influence is waning. Major news outlets framed the entire trip as a reputational misstep, with main criticisms calling out the big gap between her behavior and her message, explicitly questioning why is she using children as narrative instruments in adult image management by invoking intense, tragic childhood statistics while fiercely demanding strict privacy boundaries for her own life and kids, and then further complicating it by continuing to post to social media in the meantime. It just doesn't really make sense. And in this sort of a space, it does matter if your values and the way you're living your life aligns with what you're saying. Because when Meghan and Harry talk about online child safety, they're trying to influence change. They're trying to inspire people to fight back or implore their local governments or representatives to vote for better controls. They're trying to, influence policy. They're trying to shift this subject towards something specific, towards this goal of a safer environment online. And so it's really important that an outspoken advocate for change or for, action to be taken by governments or other people be very clearly living in alignment with what they're telling people to do, basically. And ultimately, I think the failure that is Meghan's Geneva trip really comes down to the natural struggle of someone who has a bad reputation, who's disliked by the public, and made the massive mistake of openly lying and attacking family who were not fighting back, which made Meghan and Harry look like bullies. And Meghan and Harry doubled down on the Oprah interview and whatnot for years. And so they are associated with bullying behavior because many, many people view what they did as bullying behavior. Lies, attacks that are not reciprocated or warranted, seemingly unprovoked, and breach of familial privacy and trust. All of these things are kind of inherent boundaries that most people believe should be upheld. So for Harry and Meghan to have this history of doing these things really has permanently damaged their public image, and Meghan's specifically, and her brand, quite possibly beyond repair. It is very hard to shake the bully label. Look at Chrissy Teigen, for example. It's near impossible for the public to view Meghan Markle as honest, warm, compassionate, or virtuous because of her past actions and continued mistakes in public view. For an advocate to really command change or successfully impact policy, they need all of those traits to be concretely associated with them. They need to be identifiably virtuous in the public view for people to follow them or to accept that leadership, take that leadership seriously, and for change to actually be inspired by that person. They need to be viewed as honest and virtuous and compassionate and living by example, that this is super important, so much so that I am advocating for it publicly, and it is how I also live my life. And we don't have that with Meghan. In fact, we have this opposing, conflicting versions of Meghan. To inspire the change that Meghan and Harry are looking to see, they need to not just be taking authority on the topic because they want it, or it serves their agenda, or it backs up previous claims they've made, but they need to be demonstrating it in the long term and having a public image that is positive and likable. Because an advocate with an army of public supporters turning out is powerful, and it can make a difference. We've seen it countless times throughout history. This, not so much. But let's take a look at the outfit really quickly, these tragically large Gmp's. These are certainly some of the largest wide leg trousers I think I've ever seen her wearing. They're humongous. I'm so glad she put an undershirt on for this blazer. We previously saw her wear a similar blazer with nothing underneath. That was a big mistake. But these look so silly proportion-wise. Like, look at this view from the side. She just looks like a block. Like a Lego person whose legs are stuck together. It's pretty comical, the size of these trousers, just the extreme dramatic shift from the width at the thigh to this humongous width at the bottom, and just how dramatic they are. They look insane. It adds so much bulk to her frame. It makes her look super blocky. And it just looks foolish to wear something like this that is, I don't even think they would look good on the red carpet. I think they would really only look good in like an ad or a publication of some kind, like an editorial spread in a magazine, because they are laughably large, just way too big. They're tragic. I appreciate that the blazer fits her nice and is a polished and adequate thing. I did not care for the heavy makeup though. Sometimes people think for memorials, funerals, things like that are a more serious tone, or like, you know, maybe dealing with the subject of grief, that dark eyeshadow is a safe option. But it's really not, because it can look overdone, overly styled, and too like evening, too overly done up, if that makes sense. So a simpler eye look is better, something more like a contoured eye or a simple smoky eye, rather than just a huge block of dark eyeshadow across the entire lid region as Meghan did. And she also had some pretty aggressive bronzer and blush and whatnot that was not blended well. Like, look at this foundation, not blended well down the neck here. It looks really patchy. That's unfortunate. Just less makeup. Honestly, for grief situations where people are talking about something sad, memorials, things like that, you don't need a lot of makeup. In fact, I would argue less makeup looks most appropriate, because it's identifiable with keeping the focus on the solemn subject matter, if that makes sense. Leave your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for joining me today. I hope you have a happy day ahead, and I'll see you next time. Bye!